Hey there, you. Yeah, I'm talking to you. Where are you right now? Are you at home, at school, or maybe sneaking a peek at the story under a blanket with a flashlight? Drop it in the comments below, I'd love to know. Oh, and if you like crazy, wild stories that make you laugh or gasp, hit that subscribe button fast. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming. Here's a fun question for you to think about: have you ever met someone who acts like they're the boss of everything? Maybe a kid at school who tells everyone what to do, or a grown-up who thinks they own the whole street. Well, get ready, because you're about to meet someone like that. Her name's Linda, and she's the ultimate HOA Karen. Don't know what that means? Don't worry, I'll tell you all about it. This story's going to be a bumpy, exciting ride, so buckle up tight. Okay, let's set the scene. It was a super sunny Tuesday afternoon. The kind of day where the sky's all blue, the birds are chirping, and you just want to kick back with a cold drink. I just moved into my brand new house. My name's Jake, by the way. Hi. I'm a regular guy, nothing fancy about me. I like cold soda, playing catch with my dog, and keeping things nice and quiet. I'd been dreaming about this house for a long time. It's got a little porch out front, a green lawn, and a big window where I can watch the world go by. Moving in felt awesome, like the start of something big. So, that Tuesday, I decided to make my new place feel like home. I grabbed a welcome mat from my moving boxes. It was a plain old mat, nothing wild, just blue with big white letters that said, "Hi, neighbor." I thought it looked friendly. You know, like a little wave to anyone walking by. I set it down right in front of my door, stepped back, and smiled. Perfect, I said to myself. No big deal, right? I mean, it's just a mat. Who could get mad about that? Oh, boy, was I wrong. That little mat was about to start a thunderstorm of trouble. And it all began with one person, Linda. Now, let me tell you about Linda. She lived right across the street from me. Her house was super neat, like, too neat. The grass was cut so perfect it looked fake, and her flowers were lined up like soldiers. Linda wasn't just any neighbor, though. Nope. She was the neighborhood watchdog. What's that mean? It means she watched everything. If a leaf fell in the wrong spot, she'd notice. If a kid rode their bike too fast, she'd yell. She even carried a clipboard around, scribbling notes like she was a detective or something. And her glare? Oh, man. She could stare at you so hard it felt like lasers shooting out of her eyes. I swear, that look could scare a grizzly bear into hiding. The first time I saw her, I waved and said, "Hi." She didn't wave back. She just squinted at me like I'd done something wrong. I didn't know it yet, but Linda already had me in her sights, and my welcome mat was about to make her flip out. See, Linda wasn't just nosy. She was part of something called the HOA. That stands for Homeowners Association. It's a group of people who make rules for neighborhoods, like what color your house can be or how tall your grass can grow. Sounds boring, right? Well, Linda took it super seriously. To her, the HOA wasn't just rules, it was her kingdom. She acted like she was the queen, and everyone else had to obey her. If you broke one of her rules, even a tiny one, watch out. She'd march over, clipboard in hand, and tell you off like you'd robbed a bank. Most people in the neighborhood just rolled their eyes and ignored her. But me? I was new. I didn't know the game yet. And that made me Linda's next target. So, there I was, standing on my porch, feeling good about my new mat. The sun was shining, my soda was cold, and I was ready to relax. Across the street, Linda's curtains twitched. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she was just peeking out to say hi, I thought. Huh? Nope. She was watching me like a hawk watches a mouse. I didn't see her step outside yet, but I could feel something coming. It was like that moment in a movie when the music gets all creepy, you know trouble's on the way, but you don't know what kind. My mat sat there, all innocent, saying hi, neighbor, to the world. I had no clue it was about to turn Linda's day upside down, and mine, too. Here's the crazy part, Linda didn't even know who she was dealing with that day. She thought I was just some new guy she could boss around. She figured she'd scare me with her clipboard and her loud voice, and I'd jump to fix whatever she didn't like. But there was something she didn't see coming. A big, juicy secret was hiding right under her nose. What was it? Oh, I can't tell you yet. That'd ruin the fun. Let's just say Linda was about to learn a lesson she'd never forget, and my little welcome mat was the spark that lit the whole mess on fire. So, what do you think so far? Can a tiny thing like a welcome mat really cause this much drama? Could it turn a quiet day into a neighborhood showdown? I wonder. Stick with me, because this story's just getting started. Linda's about to make her move, and trust me, it's going to be wild. Have you ever had a neighbor who freaked out over something small? Maybe a kid who got mad because you stepped on their chalk drawing, or a grown-up who didn't like your loud music. Tell me about it in the comments. I bet some of you have stories just as nutty as this one. For now, keep your eyes peeled. Linda's coming, and she's got her clipboard ready. What's she going to do next? You'll find out soon. Okay, so picture this, I'm standing on my porch, sipping my cold soda, feeling pretty good about my new house. My welcome mat sitting there, all nice and friendly, saying hi, neighbor, in big white letters on a blue background. The sun's shining, the birds are singing, and everything's calm. Or at least, it was calm. Then, out of nowhere, here comes Linda. Oh boy, Linda. She's the lady from across the street, the one with the perfect lawn and the scary glare. And let me tell you, she didn't walk over to my yard. Nope. She strutted. You know, like she was the queen of the whole world, and my little patch of grass was part of her kingdom. Her flip-flops went smack, smack, smack on the pavement with every step. It was loud, like she wanted everyone to know she was coming. She stopped right in front of my mat and stared at it. Her arms were crossed, and her clipboard was tucked under one elbow. That clipboard was her weapon. She carried it everywhere, like a teacher with a grade book. I watched her, wondering what she was up to. Then she pointed at my mat, her finger all stiff and bossy, like she was pointing at a pile of garbage. That mat's gotta go, she barked. Her voice was sharp, like a dog yapping at a mailman. I blinked. Go. My mat? What was she talking about? It's against HOA rules, she said, puffing out her chest. It's too colorful. I stood there, totally confused. Too colorful? I looked down at my mat. It was blue. Just blue. Okay, yeah, it had white letters, but come on, blue and white aren't crazy colors. It's not like I'd put out a mat with rainbows or sparkles or big red polka dots. This was a plain, simple mat. I scratched my head and tried to figure out what she meant. Too colorful. I said, kind of laughing a little. Linda, it's just blue and white. I tried to stay nice, you know. I didn't want to start a fight with my new neighbor on my very first week. So I smiled at her, hoping she'd chill out. It's just a mat, I added. There's no rule against that. But Linda? Oh, she wasn't chilling out. Not even close. Her eyes got all narrow, like slits, and she leaned closer to me. Her glare was so mean it made my stomach twist a little. You'll regret crossing me, newbie, she snapped. Newbie. That's what she called me. Like I was some kid who didn't know the rules of her game. Her voice was low and growly, like she was warning me about something big. I stopped smiling. Regret crossing her? Over a mat? Was she serious? I mean, who gets that mad about something so small? It's not like I'd painted my house purple or parked a giant boat in my yard. This was a welcome mat. A piece of fabric you wipe your shoes on. I couldn't believe it. I took a sip of my soda and tried to stay cool. Okay, I thought to myself. She's just grumpy. Maybe she's having a bad day. She's all talk, right? I figured she'd yell a little, then stomp back to her house and leave me alone. People like Linda love to huff and puff, but they don't really do anything big. At least, that's what I hoped. I mean, who would make a huge deal out of a mat? It's silly. So I shrugged and said, all right, Linda, whatever you say. I wasn't agreeing with her, I just wanted her to go away. But Linda wasn't done. Oh no. She wasn't even close to done. She stood there, staring at me like I'd just kicked her cat or something. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. It was one of those big, shiny ones with a bright pink case. She held it up like it was a magic wand, and I swear, her smirk got bigger. What was she doing? Texting someone? Calling a friend to complain about me? Nope. She tapped the screen a few times, real fast, and then put the phone to her ear. I heard it ring once, twice, and then someone picked up. "Hello, 911, she said, loud enough for the whole street to hear. My jaw dropped. 911? The emergency number? For real? I couldn't believe my ears. Linda was calling the police over my mat. She turned away from me a little, like she was putting on a show, and her voice got all dramatic. "Yes, hello," she said into the phone. "There's a disturbance at 12 Maple Street. This guy's breaking every rule." I just stood there, frozen, my soda can halfway to my mouth. A disturbance? Breaking every rule? What was she talking about? I looked around. The street was quiet. No one was yelling or fighting. The only disturbance was Linda, standing in my yard, flapping her arms like a crazy bird. I wanted to laugh, but I was too shocked. She was serious. She was actually telling the police I was some kind of troublemaker, all because of a mat that said, "Hi, neighbor." Linda kept talking, her voice getting louder and faker. "He's causing problems," she said. "He won't follow the HOA rules. I need help right now." She sounded like she was in a movie, playing the part of a scared lady in danger. But there was no danger, just me, a guy with a soda and a mat. I finally found my voice and said, "Linda, come on. It's a mat. You don't need to call 911. But she didn't even look at me. She just waved her hand, like she was shooing me away, and kept talking. "Hurry, please," she added, then hung up. She turned back to me, and oh man, that smirk. She looked like she'd just won a prize at the fair. Her eyes sparkled with this mean, happy gleam, like she thought she'd beat me. I set my soda down on the porch railing and crossed my arms. "You really called the cops?" I asked. I still couldn't believe it. She nodded, all proud. "You bet I did," she said. "You'll learn not to mess with me, newbie." There was that word again, newbie. She said it like it was an insult, like I was some dumb kid who didn't belong here. I shook my head. "Linda, this is nuts," I said. "It's a mat. Not a bomb or a tiger or something." But she didn't care. She just stood there, smirking, waiting for the police to show up and what? Arrest me? Yell at me? Take my mat away? I had no idea what she expected. Here's the thing, though, Linda thought she had me figured out. She thought I was just some guy she could boss around. She thought her big, loud voice and her 911 call would scare me into doing whatever she wanted. But what she didn't know. Trouble was already bubbling up for her. Yep, you heard me right. Linda was in for a surprise, a big one. Something was coming her way, and it was a lot closer than she thought. I didn't know it yet either, but I could feel something weird in the air. It was like the calm before a storm, when the wind gets quiet and you know the rain's about to hit. Linda's phone call was just the start. Things were about to get wild. So there I was, stuck on my porch, staring at this lady who just called the cops on me over a welcome mat. My heart was beating a little faster now. What would the police say? Would they laugh? Get mad? I didn't know. But Linda? She was so sure she'd won. She kept that smirk on her face, like she was the smartest person ever. She didn't see what was sneaking up behind her. And me? I was just trying to keep my cool, sipping my soda, waiting to see what happened next. One thing was for sure, this wasn't going to be a boring day. Okay, so things were already pretty wild, right? Linda had just called 911 on me because of my welcome mat. Yep, a mat. I was still standing on my porch, holding my soda, trying to figure out how this day had turned so crazy. But oh boy, the next hour? It was pure chaos, like a tornado hitting a toy store. Everything started spinning, and I couldn't believe what was happening. Let's dive in, because this part is nuts. It all kicked off when a police car rolled up to my house. The lights on top were flashing red and blue, spinning around like a carnival ride. I heard the tires crunch on the gravel as it stopped right in front of my yard. 2 officers climbed out. One was tall with a big mustache, and the other was shorter with a shiny badge that caught the sunlight. They both looked confused, like they weren't sure why they were here. The tall one scratched his head, his eyebrows all scrunched up. "We got a call about a mat," he said, his voice low and puzzled. "A mat?" I almost laughed. This was getting sillier by the second. Linda, though. She didn't think it was funny. Not one bit. She puffed up her chest like a big, angry bird and stepped forward. Her flip-flops smacked the ground, and her clipboard was clutched tight in her hand. "Yes, officer," she shouted, pointing at me like I was some bad guy in a movie. "This guy's disrupting the peace. He's breaking all the rules with that mat." Her voice was loud and squeaky, like she was super proud of herself. I couldn't help it. I shrugged and pointed at my mat. It was still sitting there, all innocent, saying "Hi, neighbor," in its friendly white letters. "That's the criminal right there," I said, grinning. I was joking, you know. Trying to lighten the mood. The cops looked at the mat, then at me, and they both chuckled. The short one even snorted a little, like he was trying not to laugh too hard. But Linda? Oh no, she didn't like that. Her face turned redder than a ripe tomato on a hot summer day. Her eyes got all buggy, and her mouth twisted into this angry frown. "This isn't funny," she snapped at the officers. "He's new here, and he thinks he can do whatever he wants. That mat's against HOA rules. It's too colorful." The tall officer raised an eyebrow and looked at the mat again. "Too colorful," he said, scratching his mustache. "It's blue and white." He sounded like he didn't get it, and honestly, I didn't either. Linda just kept going, though. "Yes. It's not allowed. He's causing trouble," she yelled, waving her clipboard like it was proof. I leaned against my porch railing, sipping my soda, watching this whole mess unfold. The officers didn't seem too worried about my mat. The short one even smiled at me, like we were sharing a secret joke. But Linda wasn't done. She was just getting started. She started ranting, talking so fast it was hard to keep up. "He moved in last week, and already he's ruining everything," she said. "The HOA says we have to keep things neat and plain, and that Matt is breaking the rules. I told him to take it down, but he wouldn't listen. He's disrespecting me and the whole neighborhood." Her voice got louder with every word, and she kept pointing at me like I was the worst person ever. The cops listened, but I could tell they weren't buying it. The tall one wrote something on a little notepad, but he didn't look mad. The short one kept glancing at my mat, then back at Linda, like he was trying to figure out if she was serious. I stayed quiet for a bit, just letting her talk. I figured she'd run out of steam soon. Plus, it was kind of funny watching her get so worked up over something so small. I mean, come on, it's a mat. Not a loud party or a giant mess. Just a piece of fabric with some words on it. How could that disrupt the peace? But while Linda was busy yelling, I started to notice something weird. The officers weren't acting like I thought they would. I figured they'd tell me to move the mat or maybe give me a warning, just to make Linda happy. But they weren't even looking at me much anymore. Instead, they kept sneaking little glances at each other. You know how your friends look at each other when they know something you don't? It was like that. The tall officer tilted his head a little, and the short one nodded, just a tiny bit. Then the tall one turned away and whispered something into his radio. It was one of those black walkie-talkies that crackled a little. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught a few words. "Yeah, confirm the address, suspect on site." Suspect. My heart skipped a beat. Wait a minute, were they talking about me? Did they think I was a suspect? For what? Putting out a mat? I felt my stomach twist a little, like when you're about to get in trouble at school. I looked at the officers, trying to figure it out. The tall one was still talking into his radio, his voice all low and quiet. The short one was watching Linda, but his face wasn't smiley anymore, it was serious. I thought maybe I'd heard wrong. I mean, why would I be a suspect? I hadn't done anything bad. I was just a guy with a soda and a mat. This had to be a mistake, right? But then I looked closer. The short officer's eyes weren't on me, they were locked on Linda. Locked tight, like he was studying her. The tall one finished his radio talk and turned back around, and he was staring at Linda too. Not me. Her. My brain started spinning. Wait, what was going on? Were they here for her? That didn't make sense. She's the one who called them. She said I was the problem. I took another sip of my soda, trying to stay calm, but my hands were getting sweaty. Something funny was happening, and I didn't know what. Linda didn't notice the weird looks from the cops. Nope, she was too busy talking. She kept going, piling on more complaints about me. He's rude, she said. He laughed at me when I told him the rules. He doesn't care about the HOA. He's going to ruin the street. Every word she said was like a shovel digging a hole. A big, deep hole. I could see it in my head. Linda with a shovel, tossing dirt over her shoulder, not even realizing she was making things worse for herself. I didn't say anything. I just watched. The cops listened, but they weren't nodding or agreeing with her. They were quiet, too quiet. Then the tall officer stepped closer to Linda. "Ma'am," he said, holding up his hand to stop her. She froze mid-sentence, her mouth still open. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice wasn't mean, but it wasn't friendly either. It was firm. Like a teacher who knows you're hiding something. Linda blinked, like she wasn't expecting that question. "Linda Grayson," she said, standing up straight. "I'm the head of the HOA around here. I keep things in order." She smiled a little, like she thought that would impress them. But the officers didn't smile back. The short one pulled out a little phone-looking thing, not a regular phone, but one of those police gadgets. He tapped on it, looking at the screen, then showed it to the tall one. They both nodded, real slow. My heart was beating faster now. What were they looking at? What did they know? I wanted to ask, but I kept my mouth shut. Linda didn't see it either. She was too busy glaring at me again. "See," she said to the cops. "He's trouble. You need to do something about him." But the tall officer ignored her. He whispered to the short one, and I heard another tiny bit, "Matches the report." "Report? What report?" My head was full of questions. I looked at Linda, then at the cops, then back at Linda. She was still talking, but it was like she didn't even see what was happening. Every word she said was making that hole she was digging deeper and deeper. I started to think maybe I wasn't the one in trouble here. Maybe Linda was. But why? What had she done? I didn't know yet, but I could feel it. Something big was coming. Something she didn't expect. The air felt heavy now, like before a thunderstorm. Linda kept ranting, the cops kept watching her, and I just stood there, waiting. My mat was still sitting on the porch, all quiet and innocent. But it had started something huge. What was going to happen next? I had no idea, but I knew it was going to be wild. So there I was, standing on my porch, my soda getting warm in my hand. The police car's lights were still flashing, spinning red and blue across my yard like a disco party gone wrong. Linda was in full-on rant mode, waving her clipboard and yelling about how I was the worst neighbor ever. The two officers, the tall one with the mustache and the short one with the shiny badge, were watching her like hawks. I'd just heard them whisper something about a suspect and a report, and my brain was buzzing with questions. Were they talking about me? Or Linda? I couldn't tell yet, but something weird was definitely going on. The air felt thick, like a storm was about to break loose, and I was stuck right in the middle of it. Linda didn't stop talking, not even for a second. "He's new here," she shouted at the cops, pointing at me again. "He doesn't respect the rules. That mat's just the start. Next thing you know, he'll be throwing loud parties or painting his house orange." Orange. I almost laughed out loud. My house was a boring beige color, and I liked it that way. Parties. I didn't even know enough people here to invite anyone over. But Linda was on a roll, making up all kinds of crazy stuff. "I've seen his type before," she said, her voice all high and squeaky. "He thinks he's better than us. He's going to ruin everything." She stomped her foot, and her flip-flop made a loud smack on the ground. The tall officer held up his hand again. "Ma'am, calm down," he said. His voice was steady, like he was tired of her noise. Linda huffed, crossing her arms, but she stopped yelling for a second, anyway. The short officer stepped forward and looked at me. "What's your name, kid?" he asked. "Kid? I'm not a kid." "Well, not really, but I guess I looked young to him." "Jake," I said, trying to sound normal even though my heart was thumping. "I just moved in." He nodded and wrote something down on his little notepad. "And this mat's yours," he asked, pointing at it. Yep, I said. It's just a welcome mat. I didn't think it'd cause all this. The short officer smiled a tiny bit, like he thought it was funny too. Okay, Jake, he said. We'll figure this out. Then he turned back to Linda, and his smile went away. You're the one who called 911, right? He asked her. Linda nodded fast, her head bobbing like one of those toys with a spring. Yes. Because he's breaking the rules, she said. I had to. It's my job to keep the street perfect. The tall officer tilted his head. Perfect, huh, he said, and there was something in his voice like he didn't believe her. I caught it, but Linda didn't. She just kept talking. While she went on and on, I started watching the cops more closely. They weren't acting like I expected. I thought they'd tell me to take the mat inside or maybe give me a slap on the wrist, you know, like a warning. But they weren't focused on me anymore. The tall one kept messing with his radio, turning it this way and that, like he was waiting for someone to talk back. The short one was tapping on his police gadget again, his eyes squinting at the screen. Every few seconds, they'd look at each other, then at Linda, then back at each other. It was like they were playing a secret game I didn't understand. I leaned forward a little, trying to hear more. The tall officer's radio crackled again, and this time I caught a few more words. Grayson, multiple calls, check the file, Grayson? That's Linda's last name. She'd said it earlier, Linda Grayson. My eyes went wide. Were they talking about her? I looked at Linda, but she was too busy flapping her arms and complaining to notice. He's rude, she was saying now. He laughed at me. He doesn't care about the HOA. The short officer glanced at me, and I shrugged, like, I don't know what she's talking about. He nodded, just a tiny bit, like he believed me. Then something really strange happened. The tall officer's radio buzzed, and a voice came through loud enough that I could hear it this time. Confirmed, the voice said. Linda Grayson, 14 Maple Street. Got a list of complaints here. Complaints. My jaw dropped again. Linda lived at 14 Maple Street, that's right across from me. What complaints? What was going on? The tall officer pressed a button on his radio and said, copy that. She's here now. He looked at Linda, and his face got super serious. The short officer put his gadget back in his pocket and crossed his arms, staring at her too. Linda finally noticed they weren't listening to her anymore. What? She snapped, putting her hands on her hips. Why are you looking at me like that? He's the problem. She pointed at me again, but the cops didn't even glance my way. The tall one took a step closer to her. Ma'am, he said, we need to talk to you about something. His voice was calm, but it had this edge to it like when your teacher says, sit down, and you know you're in trouble. Linda blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Talk to me, she said. About what? I called you. He's the one breaking rules. The short officer shook his head. We'll get to the mat, he said, but first, we've got some questions for you. Questions? For Linda? My brain was spinning like a top. What did they mean? What did she do? I wanted to ask, but I kept quiet. Linda's face changed. She went from red to kind of pale, like she wasn't so sure of herself anymore. Questions, she said, her voice wobbling a little. I don't understand. I'm the victim here. The tall officer didn't say anything, he just pulled out his notepad and started flipping through it. I couldn't help it, I leaned forward even more, trying to see what he was writing. The short officer noticed and gave me a little wave, like, stay back, kid. I nodded and stepped back, but my eyes were glued to Linda. She was starting to sweat now, little beads popping up on her forehead. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice getting loud again. I'm trying to help the neighborhood. He's the one you should be questioning. But the cops weren't buying it. The tall one looked up from his notepad and said, we've had calls about you, Ms. Grayson. A lot of calls. A lot of calls. My ears perked up. What did that mean? Linda's eyes got huge, and she took a tiny step back. Calls, she said, laughing a funny, nervous laugh. That's silly. Who would call about me? I'm the good guy here. But her laugh didn't sound real, it sounded fake, like she was scared. The short officer tilted his head. Neighbors, he said. They've been calling us. Said you've been causing trouble. Trouble? Linda. My mind raced. She was the one who called 911 on me. How could she be the troublemaker? Linda shook her head fast. No, 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 she said. That's not true. They're lying. I keep the street perfect. But the cops didn't look convinced. The tall one flipped another page in his notepad and read something under his breath. I couldn't hear it, but whatever it was, it made the short one nod again. They were onto something big. I could feel it in my bones. Linda was still talking, trying to explain herself. Those neighbors are just jealous, she said. They don't like that I'm in charge of the HOA. They're making stuff up. But every word she said was like another scoop of dirt. You know how when you dig a hole at the beach, and the more you dig, the deeper you get? That's what Linda was doing. She didn't see it, but I did. The cops did too. Their eyes were sharp now, like they were putting puzzle pieces together. I stayed quiet, watching her flop around like a fish on a dock. My mat was still there, just chilling, but it had started something huge. Linda thought she was winning, but she was walking right into a trap and she didn't even know it yet. The tall officer looked at me for a second, then back at Linda. We'll sort this out, he said, his voice low. But you need to come with us for a minute. Come with them. Linda's face went white as a sheet. What? She screeched. Me? Why? He's the one with the mat. She pointed at me one more time, but the cops didn't budge. The short one stepped closer to her. Let's just talk, he said. We've got some things to check. I couldn't believe it. Linda was in trouble, real trouble. Not me. Her. My heart was pounding now, but not because I was scared, it was because I was excited. What had she done? Why were the cops after her? I didn't know yet, but I could tell it was big. Linda was still arguing, her voice getting louder and shakier. This is a mistake, she yelled. You're supposed to help me. But the cops weren't listening anymore. They were done with her excuses. I took a big sip of my soda, trying not to grin. Linda had called 911 to get me in trouble, but now the tables were turning. Something wild was about to happen, I could feel it. The air was buzzing, the cops were ready, and Linda was digging that hole deeper every second. What was next? I had no clue, but I wasn't going anywhere. This was getting good. Okay, so here we were, things were already crazy, right? Linda had called 911 on me because of my silly little welcome mat, and now 2 cops were standing in my yard, flashing lights and all. I was on my porch, sipping my warm soda, watching Linda yell and wave her clipboard like she was the boss of everything. She thought she had me in big trouble, thought she'd won the day. Oh boy, was she wrong. Just when Linda was sure she had the upper hand, something huge happened. It was like a lightning bolt hitting the ground, boom. Everything changed in a snap. Let's get into it, because this is the part where it all goes wild. Linda was still talking, her voice loud and squeaky. He's the problem, she kept saying, pointing at me like I was some sneaky bad guy. That mat's against the rules. You need to do something about him. She puffed up her chest, smirking like she'd just scored the winning goal in a soccer game. The cops, the tall one with the mustache and the short one with the shiny badge, were listening, but they weren't smiling. They'd been acting funny for a while, whispering to each other and checking their radio. I could tell something was up, but Linda? She didn't see it. She was too busy thinking she was in charge. Then, out of nowhere, the tall officer took a big step forward. His boots thudded on the grass, and he looked right at Linda. His face was serious, like a teacher about to send someone to the principal's office. Ma'am, he said, his voice sharp and loud, are you Linda Grayson? Linda stopped talking mid-sentence. Her mouth was open, and her eyes got all big and buggy. She froze, like a deer caught in headlights. Yes, why, she said, her voice wobbling a little. She didn't sound so bossy anymore, she sounded nervous. I leaned forward on my porch, my heart beating fast. Why did he ask that? What was happening? The tall officer didn't answer right away. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a little notepad, the same one he'd been writing in earlier. He flipped it open, his eyes scanning the page. Linda stared at him, her clipboard hanging loose in her hand. "Well," she said, trying to sound tough again. "What's this about? I called you here." But the officer didn't look up. He just kept reading, his finger sliding down the paper. Then he looked at her, and his face was hard like stone. "We were already on our way here," he said. "Got a warrant for your arrest." "A warrant?" My jaw dropped so fast it almost hit the porch. "An arrest? For Linda?" I couldn't believe my ears. Linda's face went white like all the color just whooshed out of her. "What?" she screeched, her voice so high it hurt my ears. "A warrant? For me? That's ridiculous." She flapped her arms, her clipboard slapping against her leg. She looked like a chicken trying to fly, flopping all over the place. "This is a mistake," she yelled. "I'm not the bad guy." "He is." She pointed at me again, but the cops didn't even glance my way. The short officer stepped up now, crossing his arms. His badge gleamed in the sun, and his eyes were locked on Linda. "This isn't your first fake 911 call, is it?" he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was firm, like he knew something she didn't want him to know. Linda's mouth opened and closed, like a fish pulled out of the water. "Fake," she stammered. "No. I mean, this isn't fake. He's breaking rules." But the short officer shook his head. "We've got records, Ms. Grayson," he said. "You've called 911 before lots of times. Over little things. Like this, Matt." I blinked. "Lots of times. Linda had done this before?" My eyes got wide, and I set my soda down on the railing. This was getting juicy. The tall officer nodded, flipping another page in his notepad. "Yep," he said. "Multiple complaints about harassment and misuse of emergency services." Harassment. Misuse. Those were big words, but I knew what they meant. Linda had been bugging people and calling the cops when she shouldn't. The short officer kept going. "And that's not all," he said. "Neighbors say you've been sneaking around, spying, even stealing mail." "Stealing mail?" My eyes got so big they almost popped out of my head. Linda. Stealing mail? This lady was next level crazy. I pictured her sneaking around at night, peeking in mailboxes, grabbing letters like some kind of sneaky raccoon. No way. I looked at her, waiting for her to say it wasn't true. But Linda just stood there, her mouth flapping again. "What?" she yelled. "That's a lie. I don't steal anything." "Who said that?" Her voice was all shaky now, like she was scared. The tall officer didn't flinch. "We've got statements," he said. "Lots of them. People on this street have been calling us about you for months." Months. My brain was spinning like a top. Linda had been causing trouble for months. And here she was, acting like I was the bad guy. I couldn't help it, I grinned. Big time. My lips stretched so wide my cheeks hurt. Linda's big plan to ruin my day had just blown up in her face like a water balloon popping all over her. The cops weren't here for my Matt. They were here for her. Talk about a plot twist. I wanted to jump up and cheer, but I stayed still, watching it all go down. Linda didn't give up, though. Oh no, she kept fighting. "This is nonsense," she shouted, waving her clipboard like a sword. "I'm the head of the HOA. I keep this neighborhood perfect. Those neighbors are liars. They're mad because I make them follow the rules." She stomped her foot, her flip-flop smacking the ground again. "You should be arresting him," she said, pointing at me one more time. "That Matt's illegal." The short officer raised an eyebrow. "Illegal," he said. "It's a Matt, ma'am. Not a crime." The tall one nodded. "We're not here for a Matt," he said. "We're here for you." Linda's face twisted up like she'd just bitten a sour lemon. "Me," she screeched. "This is outrageous. I'm the victim. He's the one causing trouble." But the cops weren't listening anymore. The tall one pulled something out of his pocket, a piece of paper. It was folded up, but he opened it and held it out. "This is the warrant," he said. "Signed by a judge. You've got to come with us." Linda stared at the paper like it was a snake. "No," she yelled. "I'm not going anywhere. This is a mistake. I'll call my lawyer." The short officer stepped closer. You can call your lawyer from the station, he said. Right now, you're under arrest. Under arrest. Those words hit like a thunderclap. Linda's eyes got huge, and she took a step back. Arrest, she said, her voice cracking. You can't arrest me. I didn't do anything. But the tall officer was done talking. He reached for his belt and pulled out a pair of shiny handcuffs. They jingled a little, like tiny bells. Turn around, ma'am, he said. Hands behind your back. I couldn't believe it. Handcuffs. For Linda? My grin got even bigger. I couldn't stop it. Linda's mouth flapped one more time, but no words came out. She looked at the cops, then at me, then back at the cops. This is insane, she finally yelled. He's the one you should cuff. That Matt's a disgrace. But the short officer just shook his head. Enough about the Matt, he said. Turn around. Linda didn't move. She just stood there, shaking her head like a kid who didn't want to go to bed. The tall officer didn't wait. He stepped forward, grabbed her arm gentle but firm and turned her around. Linda squealed like a piglet. Let go, she shouted. This is wrong. I'll sue you all. But the cuffs went on anyway. Click, click. The sound was loud and clear, even from my porch. Linda's hands were locked behind her back, and her clipboard fell to the ground with a thud. She twisted around, trying to look at the cops. You can't do this, she yelled. I'm innocent. I leaned against the railing, my soda forgotten. Innocent. Huh? The cops didn't think so. The short one picked up her clipboard and tucked it under his arm. We'll see about that, he said. You've got a lot of explaining to do. The tall one started walking her toward the police car, holding her arm so she couldn't wiggle away. Linda kept yelling the whole way. This is a setup, she said. He's behind this. That newbie tricked you. She glared at me, her eyes like fire. I just waved, all casual, like, see ya. I wasn't behind anything. I was just a guy with a mat. But she didn't believe that. The neighbors were peeking out now. Curtains twitched, and a few heads popped out of windows. Mr. Jenkins from next door stepped onto his porch, his dog barking like crazy. What's going on? He called. The short officer looked over. Just taking care of some business, he said. Nothing to worry about. But Linda didn't agree. Tell them, she shouted at Mr. Jenkins. Tell them I'm a good neighbor. Mr. Jenkins didn't say anything. He just scratched his head and went back inside. Guess he didn't think she was so great. The tall officer opened the police car door, and Linda dug her heels in. No, she yelled. I won't go. You've got the wrong person. But the cop wasn't playing. He guided her into the back seat, and she flopped down, still screaming. This is all because of him, she said, nodding at me. That Matt started it? I couldn't help it. I laughed. A little chuckle slipped out, and Linda heard it. You think this is funny, she screeched. You'll pay for this, newbie. The door slammed shut, and her voice got muffled, but I could still see her mouth moving through the window. The short officer walked over to me, brushing his hands off like he'd just finished a chore. Sorry about the drama, he said. She's been a problem for a while. I nodded, still grinning. No kidding, I said. What'd she do? Besides the mail thing? He shrugged. Lots of stuff, he said. Calling 911 for nothing, yelling at people, sneaking around. We've got a thick file on her. A thick file? Wow. Linda was a bigger troublemaker than I'd ever guessed. The tall officer got in the driver's seat, and the short one headed for the passenger side. You're good, kid, he said to me. Keep the mat if you want. Then he winked like we were buddies now and climbed in. The car started up, lights still flashing, and they pulled away. Linda's face was pressed against the window, still yelling, but I couldn't hear her anymore. She was gone, off to the police station, and my yard was quiet again. I picked up my soda and took a big sip. It was warm now, but I didn't care. I looked at my mad high neighbor. And laughed again. Linda thought she could ruin my day, but she'd ruined her own instead. The cops were here for her, not me. What a twist. I sat down on my porch steps, shaking my head. This was the wildest welcome to the neighborhood ever. and it wasn't over yet, there was more to come. But for now, I just enjoyed the quiet, grinning like a kid who'd won a prize. Linda's big flop was the best show I'd seen in ages. Okay, so things had just gone totally wild, right? Linda, the loud, bossy lady from across the street, had tried to get me in trouble over my welcome mat. She called 911, thinking she'd win, but oh boy, did that backfire. The cops showed up, and instead of yelling at me, they put handcuffs on her. Yep, Linda was the real troublemaker all along. Now it was time for the big finish, where everything settled down and justice got served. Let's jump in, because this part is super fun. It all started with that click, click sound. The tall officer, the one with the mustache, snapped those shiny handcuffs around Linda's wrists. They locked tight, and her hands were stuck behind her back. She didn't like that one bit. Her face got all red and twisty, and she started sputtering excuses like a car that wouldn't start. "This is a mistake," she yelled, her voice loud and wobbly. "I'm protecting the neighborhood. I'm the good guy here." She twisted around, trying to pull her arms free, but those cuffs weren't going anywhere. The short officer, the one with the shiny badge, just shook his head. "Tell it to the judge," he said, all calm and cool. Then he grabbed her arm, not hard, but firm, and started leading her to the police car. Linda didn't go quietly. "Oh no," she kept shouting the whole way. "You can't do this," she screeched. "I'm innocent. This is all his fault." She jerked her head toward me, her eyes shooting fire. I was still on my porch, holding my warm soda, watching it all like a movie. I waved at her, just a little wiggle of my fingers, and she got even madder. "You'll pay for this, newbie," she yelled. Newbie, that's what she kept calling me, like it was some big insult. But I didn't care. I just grinned, because Linda wasn't the boss anymore. She was in big trouble, and everyone could see it. The tall officer opened the back door of the police car, and Linda dug her heels into the grass. "No," she shouted. "I'm not going. You've got the wrong person." Her flip-flop slid a little, leaving marks in the dirt. But the cop didn't let go. He guided her right into the seat, and she flopped down with a big huff. "This is outrageous," she said, her voice bouncing off the car windows. "I'll tell everyone about this. You'll be sorry." The short officer shut the door thunk, and Linda's yelling got quieter, like someone turned down the volume. I could still see her mouth moving fast through the window, but I couldn't hear the words anymore. She looked like a fish in a tank, flapping around with nowhere to go. I looked around, and that's when I noticed the neighbors. They were peeking out from everywhere. Curtains twitched, and little faces popped up behind windows. Mr. Jenkins from next door stepped onto his porch again, his little dog yapping like crazy. Mrs. Carter from down the street opened her front door a crack, her eyes big and curious. Even the kids who usually rode their bikes around were standing still, watching with their mouths open. Everyone wanted to know what was happening. The police cars' lights were still flashing red and blue, lighting up the whole street like a big show. The short officer walked back over to me while the tall one got in the driver's seat. "She's been a problem for a long time," he said, brushing his hands together like he'd just finished a messy job. "We've had calls about her for months." Months. My eyes got wide. "Really?" I said. "What did she do?" He shrugged, like it was no big deal to him. "Oh, lots of stuff," he said. "Turns out, she's been terrorizing everyone around here, writing nasty notes, reporting fake rules, even trying to find someone for planting flowers." "Flowers?" I blinked. "She didn't like flowers?" I asked. He nodded. "Yep. Said they were too bright. She's nuts." I couldn't believe it. Linda had been running around like some mean queen, bossing people and making trouble for months. The short officer kept talking. "She'd leave notes on doors, mean ones," he said. "Like, cut your grass or else, or your mailbox is ugly." People got tired of it. I pictured Linda sneaking around with her clipboard, scribbling nasty words and sticking them on doors. What a grump. "And the fake rules?" I asked. He grinned a little. "Oh yeah," he said. "She'd make up stuff like no loud laughing or no leaving toys outside. Then she'd call us if people didn't listen. Wasted our time a lot." I shook my head, amazed. Linda wasn't just bossy, she was a total bully. "And the flowers?" I said. Who was that? The officer pointed down the street. Mrs. Carter, he said. Planted some daisies last spring. Linda tried to fine her $10 for breaking the color code. $10? For daisies? I laughed out loud. That's crazy. I said. He nodded. Yep. That's Linda. But today was the last straw. Calling 911 over your mat? That's too far. The police car started up with a rumble, and the tall officer waved at me from the window. Take care, kid, he said. You're good now. The short officer climbed in, and they drove off, lights still flashing. Linda's face was smooshed against the window, still yelling, but the car turned the corner and poof, she was gone. The street got quiet again, like someone flipped a switch. No more shouting, no more flip-flop smacking, no more Linda. Just the birds chirping and the sun shining down. I looked at the crowd, well, the little crowd that was left. A few neighbors were still outside, whispering to each other. Mr. Jenkins walked over, his dog trotting behind him. Is she really gone? He asked, his voice all soft like he couldn't believe it. I nodded. Yep, I said. Cops took her away. He smiled a big, toothy smile. Good, he said. She's been a pain forever. Always banging on my door about my dog barking. He's a dog. He's supposed to bark. I laughed. Yeah, she didn't like my mat either, I said, pointing at it. Mr. Jenkins looked at it and chuckled. That's a nice mat, he said. Says hi and everything. Mrs. Carter came over too, holding a little watering can. Did they say she stole mail? She asked, her eyes big. I nodded. That's what the cops said. She gasped. I knew it, she said. My birthday cards went missing last month. I bet she took them. Mr. Jenkins nodded. She took my newspaper once, he said. Caught her red-handed, but she said it was by mistake. We all laughed. Linda was sneakier than a fox in a henhouse. I waved at the neighbors, feeling bold. Guess my mat's staying. I called out loud enough for everyone to hear. A few people clapped like actual clapping. Mr. Jenkins gave a big whoop, and one guy down the street shouted, "Good riddance to her." I couldn't stop smiling. The street felt different now, lighter, like a big dark cloud had floated away. Everyone was tired of Linda's rules and yelling, and now she was gone. It was like the whole neighborhood took a deep breath and said, finally. I grabbed a fresh soda from inside, nice and cold this time, and plopped down on my porch steps. The sun was warm on my face, and I took a big sip. That felt good. I looked at my mat. Hi, neighbor. And patted it with my foot. You're a hero, little guy, I said, like it could hear me. That mat had started it all. Linda thought she could boss me around, scare me into taking it down, but nope. She'd messed with the wrong newbie. I wasn't some kid she could push. Well, okay, I'm young, but I'm tough. She found that out the hard way. The kids on their bikes started riding again, zooming up and down the street, laughing loud. Mrs. Carter went back to her daisies, watering them with a big smile. Mr. Jenkins tossed a ball for his dog, and the little guy barked like crazy, chasing it across the lawn. Everything felt normal again, better than normal, even. It was like Linda had been a big, mean shadow hanging over everyone, and now the sun was back out. I leaned back on my hands, watching it all, feeling pretty proud. I'd only been here a week, and already I'd helped get rid of the neighborhood grump. A lady I didn't know walked by with her kid, a little girl with pigtails. She waved at me. Hi, she said. Nice mat. The girl giggled and waved too. Hi, neighbor, she yelled, copying the mat. I waved back. Hi. I said. Thanks. That felt awesome. Linda hated my mat, but other people liked it. Maybe it wasn't just a mat, maybe it was a little sign that said, hey, I'm here, and I'm nice. Linda didn't get that, but she didn't matter anymore. I sat there for a while, sipping my soda, thinking about the day. It started with a mat and ended with handcuffs. What a ride. Linda thought she was so smart, calling the cops, trying to scare me. But all her yelling and bossing just made her own mess bigger. The neighbors told on her, the cops caught her, and now she was off to face the judge. I wondered what she'd say, probably more excuses, more I'm the victim, stuff. But it wouldn't work. She'd been caught, fair and square. The sun started dipping lower, turning the sky all pink and orange. It was pretty, like a big happy ending to a crazy story. I finished my soda and stood up, stretching my arms. Well, Matt, I said, looking down at it, we won. I laughed at myself talking to a Matt. Silly. But it felt right. Linda's big plan flopped, and my little welcome mat stayed. Justice was served, and it tasted better than soda, cold or warm. So there I was, sitting on my porch steps, the empty soda can in my hand, feeling like the king of the world. The sun was sinking lower, painting the sky all pink and orange and purple like a giant ice cream sundae melting over the trees. Linda was gone, whisked away in that police car with its flashing lights, and the neighborhood was quiet again. Well, quiet except for the kids zooming by on their bikes, giggling and shouting, and Mr. Jenkins' dog barking at his ball. But it was a good kind of noise, the happy kind, not the yelling Linda kind. I looked at my mat. Hi, neighbor. And gave it another little pat with my foot. You're the real star today, I said, laughing at myself again. Talking to a mat? Yep, I was in a goofy mood. I leaned back on my hands, letting the warm wood of the steps press against my palms. The air smelled like grass and flowers, probably Mrs. Carter's daisies down the street. It was hard to believe how nuts the day had been. I mean, I'd just moved in a week ago. All I wanted was a quiet life with my soda and my dog, who was inside napping, by the way, missing all the fun. But instead, I got Linda, a 911 call, and a big police showdown. And now I was the guy who accidentally helped get rid of the neighborhood bully. Pretty cool for a newbie, right? The street was still buzzing a little. More neighbors were coming out now that Linda was gone, like they'd been hiding until it was safe. Mrs. Carter walked over again, her watering can swinging in her hand. Jake, she called, waving at me. You're a hero, you know that. I grinned and waved back. Me? I said. Not, it was the mat. She laughed, her gray hair bouncing a little. That mat's a troublemaker, she said, winking. But I'm glad it stayed. Linda hated my flowers, and now I can plant as many as I want. She held up her watering can like it was a trophy. I'm thinking red ones next, bright red. What do you think? Red sounds awesome. I said. Make 'em super bright, Linda would hate that. We both laughed, and she nodded. Oh, I will, she said. She fined me for daisies, but she's not here to stop me now. She turned back to her yard, humming a little song, and I could tell she was happy. Really happy. It made me feel good, like I'd done something nice without even trying. Mr. Jenkins wandered over next, his dog trotting beside him with the ball in its mouth. The little guy dropped it at my feet and barked, wagging his tail like crazy. Hey, buddy. I said, picking up the ball and tossing it across my lawn. He zoomed after it, barking the whole way. Mr. Jenkins chuckled. He likes you, he said. Linda never let him play out here, said he'd ruin her view. I rolled my eyes. Her view? I said. From across the street. He nodded. Yep. She'd stand there with her clipboard, yelling at me to keep him inside. Drove me nuts. Well, he can play here anytime now, I said, tossing the ball again. The dog, his name was Rusty, Mr. Jenkins told me, chased it like it was the best day ever. Mr. Jenkins smiled, a big wrinkly smile. Thanks, Jake, he said. You're all right. Glad you moved in. That felt nice, real nice. I'd only been here a week, and already people liked me. Linda thought I'd be her punching bag, but instead, I was making friends. Take that, Linda. More neighbors started popping up, like flowers after rain. The lady with the pigtail girl came back, and the girl ran over to me. Hi again, she said, bouncing on her toes. Mom says Linda's gone for good. Is that true? I nodded. Yep, I said. Cops took her away. Her eyes got big. Wow, she said. She was mean. She yelled at me for drawing chalk on my driveway once. I frowned. Chalk? I said. That's silly. Chalk's fun. She nodded fast. Yeah. I drew a rainbow, and she said it was too messy. Her mom walked up, smiling. She's right, she said. Linda hated everything fun. I'm Lisa, by the way. This is Mia. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Mia. I said. I'm Jake. Nice to meet you. Mia giggled. You're mad school, she said. Can I draw chalk here sometime? I grinned. Sure. I said. Draw all the rainbows you want. She clapped her hands and jumped up and down. Yay, she said. Mom, can I get my chalk now? Lisa laughed. Later, sweetie, she said. Let's let Jake rest, he's had a big day. They waved and walked off, Mia skipping the whole way. I liked them already way nicer than Linda. The sun was almost gone now, just a little sliver peeking over the houses. The sky was turning dark blue, and a few stars winked at me. I stood up, stretching my legs, and looked around. The street felt alive, people talking, kids laughing, Rusty barking. It was like Linda's grumpiness had been holding everything down, and now it was free. I grabbed another soda from inside my third one today, but who's counting, and sat back down. The cold can felt good in my hand, and I popped it open with a fizzy hiss. One sip, and I was grinning again. I started thinking about what the cops said, how Linda had been terrorizing everyone for months. Nasty notes, fake rules, stolen mail, fines for flowers. She'd been like a big, mean monster, stomping around and scaring people. But not anymore. The neighbors weren't afraid now, they were happy. Mr. Jenkins told me more while Rusty chewed his ball. She once tried to make me paint my fence, he said. Said the brown was too ugly. I told her to buzz off, and she left a note calling me rude. I laughed. She's the rude one, I said. He nodded. Sure was. Glad she's gone. Mrs. Carter came back with a little flower, a daisy she'd picked from her garden. For you, she said, handing it to me. A thank you for getting rid of her. I took it, surprised. Me? I said. I didn't do much, just kept my mat. She smiled. That's enough, she said. You stood up to her, and now we're free. I twirled the daisy in my fingers, feeling kind of proud. Maybe I was a hero, a mat hero. The night got darker, and little lights flicked on in windows. Fireflies started blinking in the grass, like tiny stars you could catch. I sipped my soda, listening to the crickets start their chirpy song. The kids on bikes went inside, and Rusty followed Mr. Jenkins home, his ball still in his mouth. Mrs. Carter waved goodnight, and Lisa and Mia's house lit up with a warm glow. Everything was peaceful, really peaceful. I couldn't stop smiling. Linda thought she could boss me around, scare me into being her little puppet. But nope. She picked the wrong guy, and now she was the one in trouble. I wondered what she was doing right now. Probably sitting in the police station, still yelling about how it was all a mistake. I'm innocent, she'd say. It's that newbie's fault. But the cops had her file thick as a book, the short officer said. All those calls, all those complaints. She couldn't talk her way out of that. I pictured her in a little room, her flip-flops smacking the floor, her clipboard gone. Maybe she'd tell the judge about my mat, thinking it'd save her. It's too colorful, she'd say. Ha! Good luck with that, Linda. The stars got brighter, and a cool breeze rustled the trees. I finished my soda and set the can down, leaning back to look at the sky. My dog barked inside. He was awake now, probably wondering where I was. Coming, buddy. I called, standing up. I took one last look at my mat. Hi, neighbor, it said, all cheerful and brave. It stayed, and Linda didn't. That was just as plain and simple. She'd messed with me, messed with everyone, but now she was done. The neighborhood won, and I got to be part of it. I went inside, my dog jumping all over me, and I laughed. You missed a wild day, I said, scratching his ears. The house felt cozy, and the street outside was calm. Linda's reign was over, and we were all free to plant flowers, draw chalk, let dogs bark, and keep silly mats. I flopped on the couch, grinning like a goof. What a day. What a win. Linda thought she was the boss, but she'd messed with the wrong newbie and the wrong mat. All right, you guys, we've been on a crazy ride together, haven't we? I mean, wow, what a day. It started with me, Jake, just putting out a little welcome mat that said hi, neighbor, and ended with Linda the loud, bossy HOA lady getting hauled off in handcuffs. Who saw that coming? Not me. But now that the police car's gone, the neighbors are happy, and my mat's still sitting pretty on my porch, it's time to sit back and think about what happened. What's the big lesson here? What can we take away from this wild, wacky story? Let's figure it out together, because there's some cool stuff to talk about. So, first off, what's the lesson? I've been thinking about it a lot, sipping my soda and watching the stars come out. Here's what I came up with: sometimes, the loudest complainers are hiding the dirtiest secrets. Yep, that's it. Think about Linda. She was always yelling, pointing her clipboard, telling everyone what to do. She acted like she was perfect, like she knew everything and owned the whole street. That mat's too colorful, she'd say, or your flowers are wrong. She was so loud, you'd think she was the best person ever, right? Wrong. Turns out, she was the one causing all the trouble, writing mean notes, stealing mail, calling 911 over nothing. She was hiding sneaky, dirty secrets behind all that noise. It's kind of funny when you think about it. Linda thought she could control everyone: me, Mr. Jenkins, Mrs. Carter, even little Mia with her chalk. She strutted around like a queen, waving her rules like a magic wand. Do this. Do that. Take that mat down, she'd bark. She figured if she shouted loud enough, we'd all listen and bow down. But guess what? In the end, she got caught in her own trap. Her big plan to get me in trouble flipped right around and smacked her in the face. The cops didn't care about my mat, they cared about her mess. All those sneaky things she did came back to bite her, and now she's off to tell it to the judge. Ha! That's what happens when you think you're smarter than everyone else. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Who's the real troublemaker in your life? I bet you've met someone like Linda, maybe not exactly like her, but close. You know, that kid at school who's always bossing people around, saying, "You can't play here," or "That's my spot." Or maybe a grown-up who complains about everything: your toys, your bike, your loud laugh. They act big and tough, pointing fingers and making rules, but maybe, just maybe, they're hiding something. Maybe they're not as perfect as they pretend to be. Linda sure wasn't. She looked like the boss, but she was the sneakiest sneak of all. And here's the cool part: the quiet ones might just surprise you. That's me in this story, I guess. I'm not loud, I don't yell or wave clipboards. I'm just Jake, a regular guy with a soda and a mat. When Linda came stomping over, I didn't fight back with big words or mean looks. I just stood there, sipping my drink, letting her talk herself into a hole. And look what happened. The cops showed up, and I didn't have to do a thing. Linda's own mess took her down. Sometimes, you don't need to shout to win. Sometimes, being calm and sticking to what's right is enough. That's a pretty neat trick, huh? I've been thinking about that a lot. Like, what if I'd yelled back at Linda? What if I'd said, "No way, you're crazy," and gotten all mad? Maybe it would have turned into a big fight, and I'd look silly too. But I stayed chill, and it worked out. The neighbors saw that Mr. Jenkins, Mrs. Carter, Mia, and now they're my friends. They're happy Linda's gone, and they like my mat. So maybe being quiet isn't weak, it's strong in a sneaky way. It's like a secret power. You don't always need to be the loudest to be the toughest. That's something I'll remember forever. What do you think about that? Have you ever tried being quiet when someone's being mean or bossy? Maybe at school, when a kid's yelling about something dumb, you just sit there and let them flop around. Or at home, when someone's grumpy, you don't yell back, you just keep doing your thing. I bet it works sometimes. It's like letting them dig their own hole, just like Linda did. She kept talking and talking, and every word made it worse for her. By the time the cops put those handcuffs on, she'd buried herself deep. Quiet power, pretty cool, right? And here's another thing I learned: little stuff can make a big difference. My mat? It's tiny. Just a blue square with some white letters. But that little mat started everything. Linda got mad, called 911, and boom, her whole sneaky life fell apart. If I hadn't put it out, maybe she'd still be bossing everyone around. That's wild to think about. A mat, a thing you wipe your shoes on, changed the whole neighborhood. It's like how a tiny pebble can make big ripples in a pond. One small thing can shake everything up. So maybe the little stuff in your life matters too. Like, what if you smile at someone who's sad? That's small, but it could cheer them up big time. Or what if you draw a picture and give it to a friend? It's just paper, but it might make their day. I didn't know my mat would do all this, I just thought it was friendly. But it turned into a superhero mat, saving the street from Linda. What little thing could you do that might turn big? Maybe you've got a superhero pencil or a superhero snack hiding somewhere, something small that could surprise everyone. I'm sitting here now, looking at the dark sky, all glittery with stars. My dog's inside, snoring on the couch, and the crickets are singing outside. The street's calm, and I can still hear Mia's giggle in my head, saying, "Hi, neighbor. It's been a wild ride, hasn't it? I moved in, met a crazy lady, got the cops called on me, and ended up a hero all because of a mat. What did you think of it? Was it fun? Did it make you laugh or gasp? I'd love to know. Drop it in the comments, tell me what you liked best. Was it Linda's flip-flops? The handcuffs? The mat staying put? Let's talk about it. And hey, have you ever had a neighbor like Linda? Maybe not one who steals mail, but someone who's all grumpy and bossy? I bet you've got a story. Was it a kid next door who hates your toys? Or a grown-up who complains about your noise? Tell me in the comments, I want to hear all about it. Maybe your story's just as wild as mine. We can share and laugh together, because crazy neighbors are everywhere, right? This isn't the end, you know. I've got more stories coming, more fun, more surprises, more soda-sipping adventures. So stick around, okay? Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet, and let's keep the good times going. See you in the next story, buddies. For now, I'm gonna grab one more soda, pet my dog, and enjoy this quiet night. Linda's gone, my mat's here, and the neighborhood's happy. That's a win worth celebrating. Cheers to that.